Hey everyone, it's Justin here, America's Honest Tax Accountant from Number Crunch Nerds. In this video, we're going to be answering the question, how do you calculate if you have enough money to retire? So to kick things off, here we have Michael and Linda Harvey, and they are recently retired. However, before pulling the trigger on their retirement decision, they ran their financial situation through a series of analytics and stress testing in order to gain the confidence that they wanted that their nest egg would, number one, sustain them through a 30-year retirement using conservative assumptions, while number two, also providing a certain desired residual amount for their beneficiaries. Okay, now let's go over the relatively straightforward fact pattern that the Harvey family wanted to test. So, starting right here, Michael is currently age 65. He has about $1.4 million in pre-tax retirement accounts. He has another $700,000 in after-tax retirement accounts. For purposes of retirement income, he is looking at $41,000 of Social Security starting at the age of 67, and he is anticipating a 3% cost of living adjustment associated with that income. He also has a $14,000 pension that will begin at the age of 68, and this one has a 2% anticipated cost of living adjustment associated with it. And finally, Michael's RMDs will start at the age of 75. Then going over to Linda, she is currently age 60. She has about $700,000 in pre-tax retirement, another $300,000 here in after-tax retirement. Her starting Social Security is expected to be about $34,000. She is also planning to start at age 67 and is anticipating the same 3% cost of living adjustment. Linda has a $5,000 annual annuity that will start at age 70, and this particular one has a 0% cost of living adjustment associated with it. Also note that this annuity is going to be outside of any retirement accounts. And then finally, Linda's RMDs will also start at the age of 75. Now over here, looking at the family taken as a whole, the couple has about $1.5 million in non-tax advantaged portfolios, plus they have about $32,000 in cash accounts. On the topic of real property, the couple has a primary residence with an estimated fair market value this year of about $850,000. The residence is subject to a mortgage with about $200,000 left to pay. Now, coming down here to expenses, the couple is anticipating $120,000 of annual living expenses. That is the amount they are looking at starting in 2026, and it will be subject to a 4% annual cost of living adjustment. Note that this amount excludes any cash flow related to their home mortgage. That will be separately calculated from the $120,000 starting point for other expenses using this information up here. In addition, note that the $120,000 starting point will exclude an additional $100,000 of expense annually starting when Michael is 84 years old, plus another additional $100,000 annually starting when Linda is 84 years old. These amounts will be specifically related to and earmarked for retirement facility expenses, and they will also be subject to the 4% annual cost of living adjustment. Okay, now regarding rates of return that will be incorporated into the calculation. The couple is planning to use a 2% average annual market rate of return. In other words, the return associated with the appreciation of asset prices in the market. They're going to use a 1% average annual income rate of return. In other words, the return associated with the payment of interest and dividends and capital gain distributions. And then finally, the couple is going to assume 1/2 of a percentage point average annual rate of return on real property. Now, regarding the couple's financial goals, in addition to having having this whole plan sustain their lifestyle at the standard of living that has been defined over here in what they are going to spend during retirement. The couple would also like to have the following residual values to leave to their beneficiaries. And the goal is going to be at least $500,000 in financial assets, plus at least $850,000 in real property. This particular point right here on the real property could be interpreted that they don't want to sell their home as part of the process of covering living expenses in retirement. They want this property to pass to their beneficiaries. And then finally, regarding the distribution schedule related to their cash flow needs, the couple is going to attempt to follow a strict 4% annual distribution from all accounts. And the meaning of all accounts for this purpose will include pre-tax accounts, after-tax accounts, and non-tax advantaged accounts, but it will exclude cash accounts. In other words, basic cash accounts like checking and savings accounts will be excluded from this distribution rule. So in summary, the couple is asking, based on this starting point as laid out right here, and then following all of these assumptions and goals as laid out right here, does the couple have enough money to retire? Okay, so in order to figure that out, let's plug the Harvey family's fact pattern into the Number Crunch Nerds financial and retirement planning calculator and check out the results. And by the way, if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments what's going on in your personal retirement planning situation. All right, so here we are inside of the financial and retirement planning calculator. This is what the command center tab will look like. When you first download the calculator, there's not going to be any information in here. And so what we're going to do for this video is I'm going to put the calculator and the fact pattern side by side so we can just start entering the information together. Okay, here we go. I have the calculator on the left. I put the fact pattern on the right in sort of a vertical order. We're going to use these green check marks to put on each item so that we can keep track and make sure that we have entered all of this information into the calculator. Now, first things first, the current year is 2026. All of the values that are listed over here in the fact pattern are as of 12/31/2025. So these will all represent the starting point for the 2026 calculation and beyond. So the first thing I'm going to do is fill out this section right here, enter the age at 12/31 of each retirement year. We already said in the fact pattern that spouse 1, or Michael in this case, is going to be 65 at the end of 2026. And we said that Linda is going to be 60 at the end of 2026. We are going to put the retirement age as 1 year prior for each person, indicating that they are already retired as of the current year. And we are going to leave the goal year at 90, indicating a 30-year retirement for Linda and a 25-year retirement for Michael. Okay, next we're going to work on this section right here for Social Security. We already said that both of the individuals will start Social Security at the age of 67. Now, I have already entered the projected starting values for each age for this couple that you would get off of SSA.gov. I have entered that on a separate tab, and that is where these numbers are being looked up based on the starting ages that we have selected right here. We will get into all the details of how to set that up in the members area. But just to confirm, we have the 41,642 that agrees to our Social Security starting point indicated over here, and then down here 34,411 for Linda, 34,411 right there. I am going to go over here to the COLA adjustment and put in 3% for each person. Then coming down here, the default age when you download the calculator for RMDs will be 73, but in this case, both individuals will be starting at age 75, so we're going to change that. Then going a little bit further down on the screen, we do have one pension in question, so let's enter that. We have over here in the fact pattern that Michael will start that pension at age 68, so we're going to throw age 68 right here for Michael into the age to year converter, because sometimes we'll have to know when even things start by age and sometimes by year. So this little converter will help us figure that out. The answer in this case is 2029, so I'm going to drop 2029 into the pension income starting year. The starting amount as indicated in the fact pattern is going to be $14,882, and we have a cost of living adjustment associated with that of 2%. Now for Linda, scrolling down a little bit, we do have a section for annuities that are outside of IRAs. Note that the way this is set up is that these two rows will be associated with spouse 1, and these two rows right here will be associated with spouse 2. We will go over more details about that in the members area, but for now, since this annuity relates to Linda, we are going to put it in this row, so I'm going to drop that starting amount of $5,000 in there. Her annuity starts at age 70, so let's drop 70 into the age to year converter. That's going to be 2036, so I'm going to drop 2036 into that cell right there. And then we have a 0% cost of living adjustment associated with that annuity, so we're going to leave this cell as is. All right, let's quickly go over here and see what we have covered. I'm going to start grabbing check marks. We have covered the Social Security entry for Michael. We have covered the pension entry for Michael. We have updated the RMD starting age for Michael. And we have done the same things down here for Linda as well as the RMD starting age there. And so now we have to tackle the asset values at 12/31/2025. We also have to tackle the value of any debt, which in this case is going to be this one item, this mortgage right here. And so to enter all of that information, we're going to go over here to the net worth in retirement tab. Okay, here we are on the net worth projector for the retirement years. There is an equivalent tab and section for the pre-retirement years, which will be applicable for anyone who is still in their working years. But for this example, we are setting it up such that 12/31/2025 is the retirement date, and therefore this couple is not building up towards a retirement value. They are simply taking the retirement value that they have right now at 12/31/2025 and seeing if that value plus the assumptions about the future are sufficient to fund their retirement at their desired standard of living, taking into account their desired residual value, and seeing if they have sufficient net worth and income to appropriately retire under the assumptions in the fact pattern as of 12/31/2025. So we're going to start entering this information in this column right here, market value of all these various kinds of accounts that are applicable in this situation. Once again, this is going to be the market value at 12/31/2025. So going over here to the family section, the first item is going to be $32,717 for cash accounts. I am going to drop that number in right here in the first account called checking number 1. Okay, the next item is this $1.4 million in non-tax advantaged portfolios. For this example, we're going to just assume that that is all in one account. We do have options over here in the non-tax advantaged section to enter multiple accounts. Most people in reality will have multiple brokerage accounts, and they can be entered individually. But for the simplicity of this example, I'm just going to assume it's all in one account. And so I'm going to drop the $1.4 million right here. Now, hopping back over here real quick, let me grab some green check marks. We took care of that one, and we took care of that one. Okay, now coming back over here, that is all we have for the cash accounts. That is all we have for the non-tax advantaged accounts. Let's keep going down the list here. Next up is going to be our tax deferred accounts. So scrolling up here in the fact pattern, we do have two pre-retirement accounts right here and right here. Let's assume for the simplicity of this example that all of those 401ks have been rolled into traditional IRAs already. Therefore, we're simply going to use traditional IRA number 1 and 2 for this example. I'm going to go ahead and drop these numbers in right here. And there we go. We have the $1.4 million right here for Michael, and then we have the $674,000 right here for Linda. I'm going to go grab a green check mark, and I'm going to put one here, and then I'm going to grab another check mark, and I'm going to put one there, indicating we got that covered. Now, going down the list over here, we do not have any special purpose accounts in this example, so we're going to skip that section. Then the next item will be our after-tax accounts. Once more, we're going to assume that we are all out of employer Roth accounts at this point, and we just have Roth IRAs. So I'm going to drop the after-tax values in right here. And there we go. We have the $693,000 from up here, and we have the $293,000 from right there. I'm going to grab some green check marks, and it looks like we are now done with these first two components of the fact pattern. Let's keep scrolling down over here and see what else we need to enter. It looks like real property is the next thing on the list, so let's go back over here to the calculator. And I'm going to scroll down here to section 2, which is real and personal property. In this case, we're only going to be accounting for one thing, which is a primary residence. I'm going to drop the market value of the primary residence right there. There's the $850,000. And then scrolling all the way down here to section 3, which is going to be our debts and other amounts owed. We need to enter a mortgage loan in order to get the current value of the mortgage right here. We do have multiple tabs for mortgages and other kinds of loans within the financial and retirement planning calculator. This one right here I have set up for this fact pattern, and we will assume the starting balance of the loan in 2003 was $650,000. That will mean that at the end of 2025, which is going to be in this row right here, the amount of mortgage outstanding is going to be $232,481. That agrees to the amount right here in our fact pattern. And coming back over here to the net worth in retirement tab, the amount of the loan outstanding for whatever the end of the current year as identified right here will be brought right here into this cell. So hopping back over here and grabbing a couple more green check marks, we took care of that, we took care of that. Okay, now before continuing, let's just make sure we understand what this column right here that we were just working on, what does this column tell us? Well, the answer is very straightforward. As of the end of the prior year being 2025 in this example, the net worth of this family consists of $32,000 in cash accounts, $1.4 million in non-tax advantaged brokerage accounts. We have a grand total of about $2 million in pre-tax retirement accounts. Continuing down the list, we have approximately $1 million in after-tax retirement accounts. Continuing down the list, we have an $850,000 property, and then offsetting all of that, we have about $200,000 in mortgage, and so the starting net worth at retirement before tax effect is going to be approximately $5 million in this case. By the way, when I say before tax effect, remember that this balance right here includes pre-tax retirement accounts. And so ultimately, when we get up to the calculation of our net worth on the command center, we are going to have to make some adjustment to the value right here to take into account that some of this is on a pre-tax basis. So we'll get to all those details later on when we review the command center. Right now, let's continue entering information off the fact pattern. And to do that, let's go back over here and keep going down the list. The next item is going to be our expenses in retirement. So for that, let's hop over here to the cash flow projector in retirement. Okay, here we are. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that the information for Social Security pensions, as well as annuities which are outside of retirement accounts, that information is all going to populate right here automatically based on the entries that we put in earlier in the command center. So all we have to deal with for purposes of this example are going to be the expenses that are outlined right here. And to deal with those, we are going to go down to section 5 of this tab, where you will discover many different expense categories, starting with housing and then moving to vehicles and then moving to other kinds of loan payments, insurance, healthcare costs, retirement facilities, and so on. There are a lot of different categories here. Now, the first thing I want you to notice is that with respect to mortgage expenses, the amounts owed on an annual basis for principal and interest will be brought up here to the cash flow projector automatically based on the calculations from the mortgage amortization schedule that we looked at earlier in the video. So one more time, for purposes of this example, these items are going to be calculated separately and are not part of this $120,000. That was specifically stated in the fact pattern right here. Amount excludes home mortgage items. So we're just going to deal with this $120,000, and then separately we will deal with these two lots down here of $100,000 each. Now, there's something important that I want to point out for all of you when you are working on section 5 for the first time. My experience is that when people start laying out their cash flow projections, the one thing they don't really want to spend a lot of time on at the beginning in the first pass is laying out an extensively detailed budget. And doing that would involve going through all of these expense categories, identifying things that apply to you, figuring out how much you spend on them on an annual basis, and breaking out your annual budget on a line item by line item basis. People don't always want to do that on the first pass. they tend to want to use a high-level estimate early on, get kind of a baseline calculation about how things are going to work, and then later, some folks have a tendency to want to go back and really dig into their expenses to refine that annual budget going forward into retirement. Either approach that you want to take is perfectly fine. You can go through this in detail on the first pass. You can do a high-level summary on the first pass, which is what we're going to do in this video. And then, if you desire to do so, you can go back later and refine the budget. But as I said, for our purposes, we're just going to do a high-level estimate. And that estimate, as it says right here, is going to be $120,000 of annual living expenses. That encompasses everything on this list. Everything except for home mortgage and this retirement facility item right here. And so to enter a high-level estimate, I am going to go all the way down to the bottom right here, and I'm just going to use placeholder number 5. The very last line item in the expenses category. And I'm simply going to come over here to this cell and I'm going to type in our $120,000. I want you to take note that every expense item from down here on this last line, going all the way back up to the top where we saw the mortgage information, which was right here, every one of these cells gets summed up into a single number for your annual expenses, which is going to be right there. And because everything gets totaled up into one number, you are free to take whatever approach you would like. Either do a high-level summation to start or break it out by category, whatever works best for you. Okay, so with that said, we did enter the 120 right here. We are going to apply the 4% annual cost of living adjustment right there. That covers this item right here, so I'm going to drop a check mark by that one. We also know that the home mortgage is taken care of already, so I'm going to drop a check mark by that one. We entered the 120, so I'm going to drop a check mark by that one, and I'm going to put one more check mark out here because we have to enter this information about the retirement facility. I'm going to go back to the calculator and scroll up to the section that is specifically for that right here, retirement facility. Now in this case, we want the expenses to start later than the current year, which is 2026. We want the first $100,000 to start when Michael is 84, and we want the second $100,000 to be added to it once Linda reaches 84. And so what I'm going to do in this row right here, which I've labeled facility fee, is I'm going to put the first $100,000 right there, and then I'm going to go up right here to this row for spouse 1, and I'm going to scroll to the right and find the year when Michael turns 84, which in this case is going to be 2045. So I'm going to go down here and enter the projected starting year as 2045. And then you can see that it will put the $100,000 starting value right here in 2045. I am going to apply that 4% cost of living adjustment. It looks like there's 5% sitting in here from a prior example, so I'm just going to override that to 4%. Clicking on this button right here, we can scroll out and see that this will apply the 4% to each year going out into the future. Okay, and then the second part of this fact pattern was that another $100,000 will be added to the facility fee when Linda turns 84. So scrolling further out to the right, you can see that I have already entered that right there. That's why we have the jump from about 116 up to 221. It includes the additional 100 plus the 4% COLA, and that calculation will continue right here until Linda reaches the age of 90. Now note, you might be looking up here right now at the ages for Michael and Linda and saying, wait a minute, didn't Michael pass right here at the age of 90 according to the fact pattern that we have laid out? And if the answer is yes, then why are we including the $100,000 of facility fee for an additional 5 years right here? Shouldn't we have removed the $100,000 that is related to Michael starting right here and then going out for the remainder of the time? And I'm going to give you several answers to that question for your consideration. The first answer is yes, you absolutely could take the $100,000 out of this year and out of all of these years right here. That is a perfectly legitimate thing to do if that is the budget that you want to test. The second answer is perhaps we're considering this $100,000 that is specific specific to this item to be somewhat of a cushion item, meaning we don't know for sure when Michael is going to pass. Nobody can predict the future. I mean, maybe you can, but I can't predict the future. So if this was my cash flow plan that I am testing, I might argue, okay, generally speaking, we are going to plan for Michael to live to the age of 90. And what that might include, for example, if I go all the way back up here to the top, are things that are specific to Michael's income being cut off right here. For example, Social Security will stop right here and will not be included in the budget for these 5 years. This pension we have stopping right here and not being included in these 5 years. The underlying assumption of this pension must be that what? That it doesn't have survivor benefits attached to it. If it did, we would have to figure out how to continue the benefit or whatever portion of the benefit was applicable to a survivor for the remainder of the 5 years here. In this example, although it was not explicitly stated in the fact pattern, we are treating this as having no survivor benefits by cutting it off right there. And so if you want to stress test a fact pattern to see if it will hold up under the assumptions that you have laid out, generally speaking, you're going to want to underestimate income and you're going to want to overestimate expenses to some extent. You're certainly not going to want to do the opposite of that. You're not going to want to overestimate your income and underestimate your expenses, right? So this would be an example where we are underestimating our income. In other words, if Michael did happen to live for 5 more years, we would collect more Social Security and we would presumably collect more pension, but we are being conservative with our income by underestimating, quote unquote, what the maximum amount that we might receive is going to be. On the other hand, down here with the facility fee, we are also being conservative by overestimating, quote unquote, what our expenses could be by arguing that yes, we are sort of planning that Michael might have a life expectancy that goes to 90, but we're going to give a little bit of cushion and say, well, what if he actually lives up to 5 years longer? Will our fact pattern as laid out survive that stress test? And so the third answer that I will give you regarding this question is something that many of you have heard me say many times before. Neither one of these approaches is right, quote unquote. Nothing is inherently right or wrong. It's only right if that is the fact pattern that you want to stress test. If you want to remove the $100,000 here, that's fine. You can do that with the understanding that you are being less conservative with expenses if you start reducing expenses earlier rather than later. So hopefully that provides you some food for thought regarding how to project various kinds of income and expenses when you are laying out your cash flow planning. And for purposes of this example, let's just leave things as we're going to keep the $100,000 in here for each of these 5 years under the argument that we are being more conservative by potentially overestimating the amount of expenses that we will be facing in the final years. Okay, so coming back over here and grabbing a green check mark, we are done with this item. Let's keep going down the list. We have to enter our rates of return for various items. In order to accomplish that, we are going to go back to our net worth projector tab, and then we're going to go to these 4 columns right here and enter the rates of return as appropriate. There are 2 separate sections, one for a rate of return for the current year, and then the other section for a rate of return going forward. I have added that functionality just in case you want to have a more aggressive or conservative approach on a going forward basis as compared to the returns you are expecting for the current year. However, for purposes of this example, we're going to keep current year and future years the same. These 2 columns right here, this one and this one, is going to be for income, meaning interest, dividends, capital gain distributions, and then these 2 right here will be for market return or asset appreciation. So we have 2 primary numbers to enter here. The first one is a 2% return on accounts where achieving a market return is applicable, and then a 1% return for accounts that generate income. So going right over here to the cash accounts, I'm just going to put 1% in there. I'm going to put 1% in there. Then going down here, I'm going to put in 1% for the income and 2% for the market return right there. Then I'm simply going to copy these right here with a Control-C on my keyboard. I'm going to go down here and I'm just going to paste that same information into all of these accounts, since we are assuming for this example the same rates of return regardless of account or account type. Continuing down the list right here, I'm going to put in that information there and right there. And then the final item that we're going to need is a 0.5 percentage point right here and also a 0.5 percentage point right there. So that is going to be it for our return. Let me just scan this and double check that we have hit all of the accounts. which are currently applicable to this situation. And now I'm going to go grab some green check marks. We took care of this item right here. We took care of this item right here. And we took care of this item right there. Okay, the last items on the list right here, the goals and the distribution schedule. For that, we're going to hop back over here to the command center. Okay, starting right down here with the distribution schedule. According to the fact pattern, we are going to start taking distributions in 2026 for all 3 types of accounts. Okay, so we have that entered. Now the next item is going to be distribution rate, which we stated in the fact pattern would be a straight 4%. All right, so I have the 4% entered for all 3 types of accounts. And then right here we have a distribution rate annual adjustment where we could potentially increase the amount of annual distribution by some percentage. For example, if I put 1% right here, then the distribution in 2026 would be 4%, but the distribution in 2027 would be 4% plus 1% of 4%, and so on. That's the same concept as applying a growth rate or a rate of return to any other number as we have done throughout this schedule. However, in this fact pattern right here, we have not stated any increase to the 4%. We are going to stress test a straight 4% across the board, and we can always come back later and adjust that 4% for some sort of inflation adjustment and so forth. Okay, now coming up here to the residual value goal. It was stated in the fact pattern that we are looking for upwards of $500,000 in financial assets plus another $850,000 in real property. That's $1,350,000. So I'm going to go right over here to this cell and I'm going to type the $1.35 million in there. Okay, so with all of that data entered into the financial and retirement planning calculator, let's take a look at the results for this fact pattern, starting right here in these 2 rows and then moving down to these 2 rows. So the couple started with about $4.1 million in financial assets. They had the primary residence at $850,000 fair market value. That resulted in total assets of just under $5 million before considering debts and obligations. There was about $230,000 left on their mortgage loan as of the beginning of this example, and that resulted in a net worth of about $4.7 million. Now, we did not enter a retirement value goal as part of this exercise because the retirement value goal would be more appropriate for a younger couple, let's say a couple earlier in their working years, where they are still up here in the accumulation phase of their life. Their net worth is growing in preparation for retirement. And in such a situation, we can set up a goal that they are working toward and desire to achieve prior to retirement. However, in this example, we had already stated that the couple had arrived at the point already where they were testing their net worth to see if it would hold up against their retirement needs and assumptions. And so in that situation, we're really not working toward any retirement value goal, and therefore this item was simply not applicable for this specific example. Okay, now coming down here to these 2 rows, we have now reached life expectancy for purposes of this example in 2056. And based on all of the assumptions and data that we entered into the FRPC, the result is that the couple has about $625,000 of financial assets remaining, just under $1 million in non-financial assets, for a grand total of about $1.6 million. The mortgage has been completely paid off. There are no other debts or obligations in this example. That leads to a net worth of about $1.6 million. The residual value goal that the couple had was about $1.3 million, and so under the facts and circumstances and assumptions of this scenario, the couple has satisfied all of their retirement commitments and exceeded their retirement value goal by about $250,000. Okay, now we are going to be doing significant stress testing and results analysis of our financial planning scenarios, both on the YouTube channel and in the members area for the Financial and Retirement Planning Calculator program. This video was primarily focused on the mechanics of data entry into the FRPC. However, while we are here looking at this result of about $250,000 in excess of the couple's goal, let's make some arguments. Is this a good, quote-unquote, or a bad, quote-unquote, result for this situation? And the answer to that question, much like the answer to the interpretation of any results from a financial planning scenario is going to depend on from what point of view you are arguing the result. Let's argue it both ways, both good and bad. And just for fun, let's start with bad. This is a bad result. Now, what arguments can I make to indicate that this is a poor quality result for the couple in question? Well, what about the fact that the couple started with approximately $4 million in financial assets, and after a 30-year retirement, they have dwindled the balance down to just over $500,000. Isn't one of the basic premises of the 4% distribution rule, which for many folks will provide the baseline plan for their cash flow distribution planning in retirement, isn't one of the basic premises that you should invest in such a way that the balance of your financial assets more or less remains the same over the course of your retirement, and what you're living on in the form of distributions is the income and return that is generated by the portfolio? And if that's true, if that is our goal, then the couple clearly did not achieve that right here. If they had achieved that, I would expect a balance of roughly $4 million to also exist right down here. And so in this situation, through either a combination of overly conservative investment returns or overspending beyond what a 4% annual distribution would allow, or some other factors that we can dig into in more detail within the FRPC, this couple has allowed their capital balance to significantly deteriorate over the 30-year retirement period. So that is one of the arguments that I would make if I was analyzing this situation, and of the opinion that that is a poor result. Now, another argument I could make in favor of the fact that this is a poor result is that this residual value goal does not, in my opinion, appear to be well thought out. For example, in the fact pattern, we stated that this residual value goal was based on wanting to leave $500,000 in financial assets, plus about $850,000 in real property to the couple's beneficiaries. But in this situation, I am inclined to argue that a residual value goal should include more than just the amount you want to leave to your beneficiaries. It should include some cushion in case your actual lifespan exceeds the life expectancy that we have entered into this analysis. As the fact pattern is currently set up, there's really no cushion in here above and beyond what the couple wants to leave to their beneficiaries. They are projecting approximately $200,000 annually in retirement facility costs, for which there is no money allocated to this goal in a situation where they live beyond the stated number of years. Perhaps we should have some cushion in here for that. For example, at $200,000 a year, let's just say we want 5 years of cushion, so that would be another $1 million in the residual value goal. And of course, if they do not live to reach the additional 5 years that are included in that cushion, then that additional amount would just be passed along to their beneficiaries. But at least in that situation, they were planning for that possibility, whereas in this case, they are not. And if they were planning for that possibility, 5 extra years of facility fee costs at $200,000 annually for a grand total of $1 million additional. So this should really be $2.35 million. And in such a situation, they have not satisfied their residual value goal. As the fact pattern is set up, they are short by approximately $750,000. And under that argument, that would lend weight to the fact that the results that they have obtained as the fact pattern is currently set up are poor results. Okay, now let's undo what we just did right there and go back to the original scenario, and let's make a couple of arguments to the contrary that this, in fact, is a good result. This is a respectable, reasonable result based on the facts entered into this scenario. What are some arguments that we could make there? Well, coming over here to the Net Worth in Retirement tab and taking a look at some of our original assumptions regarding rate of return, I'm going to argue that the values we put in here for both our income and our market return, these are highly conservative values. I mean, 1% income and 2% 2% market on average, you can get more than that on cash right now. And I know that we're looking at a 30-year time horizon here, and it's certainly possible that you will not always be able to get more than this on cash through that entire 30-year period. But if this represents your actual investment plan, then we probably need to sit down with the investment advisor and figure out what the rationale is behind these values. Because it is highly likely you should be estimating something in excess of these amounts for return without taking on much, if any, additional risk. Let's just see what happens if we increase these returns just a little bit. Let's say we go to 2% on income and 3% on market return. Remember, these amounts represent the average annual return over the 30-year period. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to change all of the income rates of return to 2% and then all of the market rates of return to 3%. Okay, that is complete. And I'm just talking about the financial assets for now. So there's the 2% and the 3%. I've left this one alone for the real property. So just on that change, just these values increasing by 1 percentage point for each category of return. Same thing right there, same thing right there. And then this is only going to be income up here. Let's go back to the command center and look at the results of that. Okay, here we are. And what a dramatic difference that small increase in the amount of return received over time makes for this fact pattern. This right here is in line with what I was arguing in the first scenario, where I said, isn't the point to invest in such a way that the principal balance of your portfolio stays roughly the same over time, and what you are living on and what you are distributing to yourself is going to be the earnings and appreciation in the portfolio, not the underlying principal. This lines up much more with what I was arguing over there. In addition, you can see over here that we are well in excess of our initial residual value goal based on those adjustments. We even have that additional facility fee of $200,000 a year for 5 hypothetical years that we were just talking about. That is covered in the sense that our excess is enough to handle a situation like that. And the point is that because of those certainly arguably relatively low rates of return that we used in our initial setup, achieving an excess at the end of the scenario that was still a positive number, it was still roughly $250,000, considering how low those rates of return were, I'm going to argue that that is an extremely positive result and shows how well this fact pattern can handle downturns in the market that result in the average annual rate of return over the 30-year period to drop from what still might be relatively conservative numbers down to even lower numbers, 1% here, 2% here, values that are currently lower than the risk-free rate of return on cash. And if you can achieve a result right here that is an excess over your plan based on using rates of return that are lower than the risk-free rate of return on cash, then I'm going to argue that that is a pretty strong result for those facts and circumstances. Okay, now reversing those changes that I made to the rates of return and going back to the original scenario. Let's say we don't want to argue rate of return. What is another argument I can make that this is already a relatively strong result for this fact pattern? Well, what about the fact coming over here to the cash flow in retirement tab and then going to this facility fee expense that we've talked about a number of times? What about the fact that we already have 5 years of time baked in right here beyond the life expectancy that we had originally planned for spouse one, of the $100,000 for spouse one still being baked into these numbers? In other words, the cushion that we were talking about before is actually already baked in right here, at least for one spouse. What if I was to take the cushion out of here, for example? Let's just do a rough estimate and knock $100,000 off of this number, and the effect of that will carry forward here until 2056. Now going back over here to the command center, you can see right here that we have increased our excess from about $250,000 up to north of $750,000, where I could argue if it's going to be approximately $100,000 per year per spouse that I want to have as cushion in this example, then I have about 8 years of cushion baked into this excess right here. And considering the ages that we are already going out to for both spouses, 90 in this example, combined with the fact that maybe for this family the likelihood of both spouses actually actually living to be 90 years or older is unlikely, perhaps based on their health conditions or other factors. So with 8 years of cushion right here, I feel pretty comfortable that this is a solid result for this fact pattern that will not only achieve the residual value goal that was originally stated for their beneficiaries, but does add in that 8 years of cushion right there, which for this family should be sufficient. Let's also add to that cushion argument that yes, while this is the goal amount that they want to pass along to the beneficiaries, this is still roughly 13 years of facility fee expense that would be available if it was needed, if they lived well beyond the projections that are included in this scenario. You know, every piece of financial advice that you've ever received and that you think makes sense deserves to be tested. You owe it to yourself to test it rather than just taking it as gospel. The financial advice that you have never tested for yourself represents the gap, the critical and dangerous gap between what sounds right from the podcasters and influencers and advisors and what actually works for your specific facts and circumstances. That gap is the untested financial advice, and you can bobblehead all day to the Dave Ramseys and the Susie Ormans and the Jim Cramers, and many people will. Yep. Oh yeah. For sure. Right on. Magnificent. Bye. But until you actually put that advice to the test with your own financial situation, all that noggin wobbling doesn't change the fact that the advice in your hands remains untested financial advice. That's where the financial and retirement planning calculator comes into play. The FRPC tests the gap between what sounds right and what actually works for you. Now, what are the major differences between the FRPC and every other retirement cash flow modeling tool that is out there? Well, the first major difference is transparency. Some of the other guys' tools work a little something like this. You enter something like 5 simple inputs, you enter one prayer, and then you get an answer that by its very nature could not have been determined in any reasonable way based on 5 inputs plus 1 prayer. Then you shake your head and you ask AI what to do. Alternatively, the other guys' programs may work a little something like this. You enter something like 500 different inputs. No prayers this time. And you get an answer that, well, it must be right based on how complicated this thing is. But since the calculations occurred inside of a black box into which you have zero visibility, how are you really supposed to know? That's one of the biggest complaints that I hear about other retirement planning software packages. And it's that folks can't understand how the output numbers were derived. And if you can't understand how the results were derived, then how do you know if you can rely on the results or if they are truly meaningful in your situation? And the answer is that you can't. Or alternatively, you can, and you can just take the results as a given, kind of like when your doctor hands you that new prescription, and then you get a glimpse of his computer when he steps out of the room, and you see that he's been chatting with AI. With the Number Crunch Nerds Financial and Retirement Planning Calculator, the entire black box world of financial planning gets completely flipped on its head. Inside the FRPC, you can see every result and every calculation from where the result was obtained. The FRPC has 100% calculation transparency. Your entire financial situation can be traced from beginning to end, and we're talking about where every dollar comes from, where every dollar goes, how every dollar grows, how every dollar gets taxed, how every dollar impacts your net worth, how every dollar impacts your cash flow, and how every dollar runs through your distribution planning during retirement. Your entire lifetime cash flow planning cycle in one place with 100% transparency. I like to say that transparency is not a feature of the FRPC. Transparency is the foundation. Now, the second major difference between the FRPC and the other programs is going to be the training. You will receive extensive video-based training from day one that combs line by line through the FRPC, leaving no stone unturned. You will understand, number one, how the FRPC works. Number two, how to use it. Number three, how to scenario test financial strategies. Number four, how to interpret the results. And number five, much more. The FRPC doesn't compete with your financial advisor. The FRPC makes you a better client, because for the first time, you will have a place to bring and test out all of your financial advisor's recommendations. Does their 6% return assumption hold up against your actual retirement spending? Does their distribution strategy sustain your cash flow in year 23? Does their plan actually produce the retirement that they promised? The FRPC lets you find out before you bet your future on it. Now, if you are already a member of the Financial and Retirement Planning Calculator program, you have immediate and total access to all 2026 updates that I have recently uploaded to the members area. So for folks who are already members, you can simply log in and check out all of those extensive updates at your convenience. And if you're not already a member, the FRPC is your ticket to the answers that you've been searching for such a long time, but have only found as high-level, anecdotal, unsatisfying, incomplete, one-size-fits-all, or impossible to verify. Answers to questions like, will my money last through retirement? Is my cash flow sustainable? Am I on track? What happens if returns are lower than expected? What happens if I live longer than planned? The FRPC doesn't guess, it calculates. You can join the FRPC program with lifetime access for a one-time access fee at the link in the description below this video on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you inside the class.